Welcome to another episode of Serial Streamers. And if you're asking yourself, what the hell is Serial Streamers? Well, it's like a book club, only better. But it is actually a TV club for people like you and me who are out there binging all the true crime documentaries. And it's basically a way for us all to gather, watch the doc together, virtually together, and then come back to my Instagram at Jami on Air and share all of our thoughts, because not all of us have a partner in our lives who wants to hear about all these true crime docs that we're watching. But guess what? I want to hear about it. I think you want to hear about it. So let's chat. Let's meet. Join the club. Follow me at Jami on Air. That's Jami on Air. And you will be able to join the club easily and talk about all these documentaries that we're all watching. And a lot of people have said recently, like I've been doing this for the last few months, if you want to kind of be lazy about this and you don't want to watch the documentary, or you don't have time to watch the documentary, basically, I do a good recap, I think, of each of these documentaries. So a lot of people tuning in haven't even watched the documentary, but they're either watching me on YouTube or listening on the podcast, Murderish Podcast, and they're getting enough of a recap to where they feel like, I don't really need to go watch the documentary. So you're still getting a true crime story either way, whether you've watched the documentary with us or not. So either one is fine. I do want to offer a few trigger warnings with this story that we're about to cover. There are talks of religious cults, physical abuse, manipulation, and I drop the occasional F-bomb. So be prepared. The documentary that we are covering in this episode of Serial Streamers is Going Clear: Scientology and the Prison of Belief. And this documentary came out in 2015. Scientology basically is a church or a religion. In my opinion, it's a religious cult. But if you go to Scientology's website, they're going to call it a religion. But I think you and I can kind of read between those lines, if you know what I'm talking about. Scientology was founded in 1954 by a science fiction novelist named L. Ron Hubbard. Emphasis on fiction. We'll get more into that. But this whole thing the whole premise of this church or religion, I think, is a bunch of fiction. And there are a bunch of celebrities who are and were Scientologists. People like John Travolta, Tom Cruise, and the church parades Tom Cruise around because I believe he's the biggest star that they have, who is a devout Scientologist. And they've made a lot of money on him, and we'll get into that. Also, people like Priscilla Presley, rest in peace, as well as Danny Masterson. Ew. Now, a guy named David Miscavige took over Scientology when L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986. And Miscavige has said things like, about Scientology, he said things like, we're out to make every life extraordinary. Next stop, infinity. And what the hell does that even mean? It's like, a lot of times these cult leaders, they just spit out a bunch of word vomit that doesn't really mean much. And you have to kind of try to read between the lines. But even when you do, none of it makes any sense at all. It's entirely vague. And I think that that's by design. And while I was watching this documentary, there was this scene where they were at the International Association of Scientologists Gala. And this was in 2013. And I noticed that Tom Cruise and David Miscavige, the current head of Scientology, they salute L. Ron Hubbard, the founder, as well as each other. And I couldn't help but thinking that that is so gross. I don't know. I've never been in the military. I don't come from a military family, but something about saluting these trash people just gives me the major ick. And it makes me think that's such a disrespect to people who have actually served and deserve a salute. I don't know. I don't know how it all works, but especially somebody like L. Ron Hubbard. And we're going to get into this. We're going to talk more about his misgivings, and there are a lot of them. But the fact that they're saluting a guy who literally kidnapped his kid and reportedly abused his wife, why are you saluting this trash guy? It just makes no sense to me. Now, in Scientology, members pay money for these courses, and they're bullshit, as you will find out. And you have to move your way through these courses. I think they start at like OT1 and they end at OT8. And allegedly, when you get to OT8, you're considered clear in Scientology, whatever that means. And there's also something called the Sea Organization, or the Sea Org for short. And this is for people who are really down for Scientology. I'm talking like so down for the cause that they sign a 1 billion year contract to be in the Sea Org. You heard that right. Billion years. And supposedly the way that Scientology spins it for these people who join the Sea Org and commit for 1 billion years, they basically are supposed to have a positive impact on mankind. And they're helping the universe and planet. And they are convinced that they're actually saving the world. When in reality, this is just my theory, but let me know what your thoughts are. When in reality, I think that L. Ron Hubbard created the Sea Org in the 1960s because at that time, he was under investigation in 3 countries, and he took to the sea, the open sea, to escape penalty. And when you take to the open sea to escape penalty, you can't just man and operate a ship or a boat by yourself. You need help, but he doesn't want to pay that help. So he enlists people in the Sea Org who think that it's like their duty to help this man save the universe. And you essentially have a bunch of people who are willing to do free labor, night and day, backbreaking labor on this boat so that the founder of Scientology can run away from people who are investigating him and escape penalty. That's why I believe he created the Sea Org, was really just about to serve himself. He needed people to man the boat that he was on in the open sea to escape penalty. Now, L. Ron Hubbard was born in 1911 in Tilden, Nebraska. He was a prolific science fiction writer. I guess he wrote over 1,000 books. And he wrote for Astounding Science Fiction publication. He wrote science fiction about getting man to the stars. And he ended up mixing a lot of his imagination and science fiction into his theology. Something L. Ron Hubbard also was a massive liar. He did serve in the military, but he lied. I guess he wrote that he had apparently sunk 2 Japanese submarines, which was all a lie and could be proven through his military record. So he would lie about being some sort of war hero. But eventually he was relieved of his military duties. He finds himself in Los Angeles, California. At that time, he moves into this mansion in Pasadena, California, with this guy named John Jack Whiteside Parsons. And this guy was like this kooky black magic dude who wanted to impregnate a goddess to create the Antichrist. So this is who L. Ron Hubbard was living with at the time, and maybe he influenced his kooky beliefs later on in life. Hubbard ends up running off with this kooky black magic guy's girlfriend, who was about 13 years younger than Hubbard. And of course, L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology as a whole, they try to bury this fact because they want to make the dude look better than he was. And we're going to get into that because he wasn't a good guy at all. Hubbard at one point told his girlfriend, who I believe later became his wife, and they had a child together, that he was this war hero and that he had survived sunken ships. And of course, it was all lies, which was proven easily by his military records. So, if you guys hear something in the background, it's this dog, Clipper. He is in the room with us now and he's shaking and jingling his little tags. Anyway, they always make an appearance in these videos. Hubbard also said that his blindness was from a war injury, which I don't believe ended up being true. And he also said it was eventually cured by Scientology. Hubbard's girlfriend did say that he was physically abusive with her. He threatened to kill her if she left him. And they did have one child together. In 1950, L. Ron Hubbard begins writing Dianetics, which was a book that he believed was a true psychological breakthrough. And actual psych experts were like, yeah, no, this book's bullshit. This is not a psychological breakthrough. Because L. Ron Hubbard had no expertise or training or education in psychology at all. Yet he practiced it with the members of his church that he would go on to establish. And Apparently, L. Ron Hubbard told his wife at one point, the only way to make a lot of money is to have a religion, because then you won't give all the profits away to the government. And that's exactly what he did. Now, his book, Dianetics, hits the New York Times bestsellers list. And basically, like I said, Hubbard had no psychiatric expertise, yet he played the part among his followers, which is an extremely dangerous thing to do. He developed his own version of mental health techniques that steered people away from actual science-backed mental health treatment. His wife would go on to allege that L. Ron Hubbard was a paranoid schizophrenic. In Scientology, there are these sessions called audits, and there are auditors in Scientology. And an auditor is basically a practitioner who listens to people via an e-meter. And an e-meter is, I mean, like, it looks to me like it's literally like two freaking cans with a string tied, attaching them, kind of like when you used to play telephone before cell phones came out as a kid. And basically the e-meter is supposed to measure the mass of your thoughts. And it helps discharge, allegedly, it helps discharge the bad emotions, essentially throwing the bad emotions away, getting rid of them. And in reality, what these audit sessions do is they allow the leaders of Scientology to gather a shit ton of information on members who think that this is a private session between them and the auditor. And they divulge all of this personal information that Scientology leaders can then use later against them if they ever decide to turn on Scientology. In the 1950s, L. Ron Hubbard saw dollar signs with Dianetics. It starts gaining popularity. So what does he do? He starts charging for Dianetics training. And of course, his wife says, she believed he was scamming people the whole time. And I also believe he was. And people start seeing L. Ron Hubbard as like a godlike figure, which when you know who the fuck this guy was, it shocks me that anybody saw him like anything close to God. His wife at some point says that Hubbard became very paranoid and a very scary person. She said that she threatened to leave him if he didn't get psychiatric help, but Hubbard responded by kidnapping their daughter and taking her to Cuba. And reportedly, Hubbard left their daughter in the care of a mentally challenged woman and her daughter, and that woman supposedly kept their daughter in a cage. At one point, while Hubbard has abducted their daughter and he's in Cuba, he calls his wife and tells her that he killed their daughter, chopped her up into tiny pieces, and threw her into a body of water, only to call her back later to say, oh yeah, no, I was just kidding, like she's still alive. And this went on and on. He would play with her emotions like this. And that's the founder of Scientology. The Church of Scientology is reportedly a woman beater, a child abductor, and so many other things, as you will find out. Oh, and also a liar about being a war hero. And people follow this religion to this day. Wild. Hubbard and his daughter eventually do return to the U.S., and the wife does eventually leave him. Oh, but of course, Hubbard, before she left, he clears out all the bank accounts, leaving her penniless. Meanwhile, the Dianetics trend starts to fade, and Hubbard goes broke, but he repackages it being Dianetics, into Scientology. And what he does is he basically is charging people to join the church to get clear. Like, he's charging people to go through these bullshit courses to get to the point where they're just clear of all the bad shit in their mind, for lack of a better term. And of course, you have to pay for every single step to get clear, because of course. And how the fuck does a science fiction novelist, kooky dude, know how to get somebody clear? He has no psych training, no expertise, but whatever his weird science fiction writings and courses are somehow going to get you clear. Make that make sense. And of course, L. Ron Hubbard keeps adding on more and more and more courses because he's seeing dollar signs, right? People are paying for these courses and he's like, oh my God, I need to add OT4, OT5, OT6, like whatever he can add to make more money, he does that. And people keep on paying for these expensive courses because they all want to get clear. They call it the bridge to total freedom, but I call it the bridge to total bankruptcy because these people are emptying their pockets. People who are not wealthy people at all. They're charging credit cards and doing whatever it takes. Kind of like an MLM is like, girl, charge that $500 starter kit on your, credit card. It's fine. You pay it off later with all the money you're going to make. I think that's what they did in Scientology. They pressure people to do whatever they can to pay for these freaking courses that are just bullshit. And the Church of Scientology was and still is worth multi-millions of dollars, if not billions at this point. And at some point, they, being the leaders of the Church of Scientology, they request a church tax exemption. And of course, it was denied at first because they found that L. Ron Hubbard was using the church's money for his own personal gain. Because of course, in the late 1960s, the IRS is investigating L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, he just gets better and better. And by better, I mean worse. They're investigating Hubbard for tax evasion. And what does he do? He fled the US for an unknown location. Meanwhile, the Church of Scientology continues to grow bigger and bigger and bigger while he's on the run. And it's at this point that we need to stop and have a moment for L. Ron Hubbard's rotten mouth. It reminded me of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. So it's like in a game of would you rather sniff L. Ron Hubbard's toothbrush or come within 5 feet of Richard Ramirez's level 10 halitosis? I swear to God, I'd rather gnaw off my left arm and give up Mexican food before I do either one of those things. Neither one of them ever saw a dentist in their lives. That's a fact. And Hubbard ends up remaining in hiding the rest of his life. And so what the hell does that tell you? I mean, these people are following a church that was founded by a guy who did all of these disgusting, unforgivable things. And he was just on the run the whole time that he's leading this church. And meanwhile, it's growing bigger and bigger. Make that make sense. In 1969, the Church of Scientology purchases a celebrity center to basically draw in celebrities into Scientology. And all I can think is cha-ching, because the more celebrities and high profile people you have in this church to go spread the word, first of all, the more amount of money that they're going to donate, and they're going to get their rich friends to donate. And it's just going to grow bigger and bigger. And it was all by design. They don't want these celebrities in the church because they think that they can help them go get clear. They want them because they have money. They have deep pockets. And supposedly, they talk about this in the documentary. Once members of the church get to OT3, that's when you get secret materials that are allegedly handwritten by kooky L. Ron Hubbard. And basically, when people get these materials, what they see in front of them is a fantastical, weird science fiction story that makes absolutely no sense. The story talks about this Xenu overlord, stories of overpopulation in the world, volcanoes, and disembodied spirits that are dropped into volcanoes. It's what the fuck? People are left completely confused once they get these OT3 handwritten materials. And they're like, this is what we did all this work for to get this fantastical science fiction story? Is this shit real? What even is this? And if that doesn't tell you the state of mind that L. Ron Hubbard was in when he was leading all these people, I don't know what will. It's just, he was not well. He was not well. And at some point, people start believing that they're infested by creatures, and it's absolutely driving them crazy. They're going to more and more auditing sessions to get rid of these creatures that don't exist, but they think they do. And of course, this causes deep depression in these people who become, some of them, suicidal because they just can't get rid of these creatures and it's driving them crazy. And of course, L. Ron Hubbard's you need more auditing, more auditing, more auditing, because that's going to get you clear. That's going to get you rid of these creatures. But really, all it was doing was driving them crazier and crazier and more depressed, and also draining their bank accounts during the process. In 1986, 74-year-old L. Ron Hubbard dies from a stroke, and that's when David Miscavige takes over. Enter the tiny devil man. Miscavige has a major Napoleon complex. This guy is all of 5'3", And he reportedly physically abused people to get to the top, to rise to the top of Scientology. He's just an absolute tyrant, according to many people who've left the church. Apparently, Miscavige joined Scientology when he was only 11 years old and rose through the ranks from there. And Scientology, they talk about it in the documentary, is known for viciously going after anybody who goes after Scientology or even says any little thing that's disparaging to the religion. If you do, they will literally do PR messages in major publications about things that you divulged in what you thought was a private auditing session. They call them black PR packages. They essentially blackmail you oh, you're going to say something bad about Scientology? Cool. We're going to talk about that thing you said about your wife in this publication over here so all the world can read it. Rehabilitation Project Force. And this is essentially where Scientologists were sent when they were against the church in any way. This could be big or small. Or if they even questioned anything about Scientology. And according to Spanky, who is a PR consultant who used to work with John Travolta, and she became very, very close to John Travolta, the children of Scientologists were sent to the RPF, and they were held in deplorable conditions. She talks about urine-soaked diapers, mucus-filled eyes, kids with high fevers. And Spanky and her daughter thankfully do end up escaping the Church of Scientology at some point. But they were in it for years. But as soon as she saw, the deplorable conditions that her daughter or her child was being held in at the RPF, she was like, I'm out, and she escaped. And all I could think is, why the fuck would John Travolta stay in Scientology if he knows for a fact that his friend Spanky, who was at his wedding, or he was at her wedding, I believe, her child went through something awful that could have killed her child, yet John Travolta stays in the church. And allegedly, John Travolta did try to leave the church at one time. However, the leaders of Scientology have a major black PR package on him, allegedly. And it's based on all the information that they secretly gathered during all of his years of auditing sessions. And if that shit were to come out, it would ruin him. And so he's sort of forced to stay in Scientology. Now, this has not been confirmed, but it has been reported more than once. Now, L. Ron Hubbard keeps insisting that Scientology is a religion and it should have tax exemption. So he basically says, well, I'm going to refuse to pay my taxes. I will not pay my taxes because we should be, tax exempt. And churches get tax exemption because they're expected to not hoard the money that they make. They're expected to take that money and use it for the good of the community, to do good for the public. They are not supposed to hoard their money at all. Now, in the 1980s, fast forward to Tiny Devilman, David Miscavige's leadership in the Church of Scientology. At that point in the 1980s, the church is facing a $1 billion tax bill because L. Ron Hubbard refused to pay taxes all that time. So it finally caught up with the church, and now they owe the government $1 billion. This would have crumbled the church. So the strategy that the leaders of Scientology enlisted was that they got a bunch of Church of Scientology members to file 2,400 lawsuits against the IRS, specific IRS agents as well. And it was essentially a litigation nightmare for the IRS. Scientology, during this fight with the IRS, they send secret agents down to IRS events to monitor employee drinking. If they see anybody drinking, basically they're exposing the IRS for footing the bill for those drinks. So basically what Scientology is doing is they're like, if we just wear the IRS out with all these 2,000 plus lawsuits and sending secret agents down to their events and just tackling them with, video footage of IRS agents behaving badly, whatever, and threatening to expose it. Eventually, the IRS is going to become fatigued, and they're just going to give us our tax exemption. And that is exactly what happens. The IRS starts to grow tired from the litigation nightmare, and the negotiations begin between the IRS and Scientology. And in 1993, the IRS issues a letter making Scientology tax exempt, just like any other church. And essentially, the IRS just gave in. They were tired. And this was a huge win for Scientology. They can buy properties now, $1 million properties plus, not pay taxes on any of it. They can make money and not pay the government anything in taxes. And they can look and act just like a church. And they make millions and millions from this victory with the IRS. And in addition to that, the labor at the church is essentially free because they have all these thousands of Sea Org members who make like pennies on the dollar. They literally make like 6 cents to 40 cents per hour. So it's essentially free labor. Not only is Scientology getting to buy these multi-million-dollar properties and not pay any property tax, they're getting all these donations from celebrities that they're not paying tax on. They are making profits that they are not paying taxes on. And they are hoarding and hoarding and hoarding all of this money. So you can start to see how Scientology has grown today to be worth, I imagine, over $1 billion in assets. All the while, this is a nonprofit church. Make that make sense. Like, why should a church be worth billions in assets? Because they're hoarding money and they are not spending it on the good of the public like a church should do with their funds. At one point, the FBI was even investigating Scientology for human trafficking. But the FBI does eventually drop their investigation after Scientology was victorious on one of these big lawsuits because, you know, the FBI figures like they're basically protected. There's nothing that we can do. It's not worth it for us to pursue this because they're a protected organization, obviously. Okay, in the documentary, there is this music video that Scientology makes, or Scientology members make, and it's called We Stand Tall. And it reminded me of like an exceedingly shitty version of We Are the World, which was like a freaking mega hit in the 1980s. And I mean, if you walk into any church right now, somebody will greet you and they'll be able to tell you what they're about, what they believe in, what their mission is in just like a few words. And they'll get right to the point and it will make sense to you. But not with Scientology. With Scientology, you have to pay a shit ton of money and go through all the bullshit courses for them to like at OT3 after you've paid thousands of dollars. You get this like fantastical story that's handwritten by L. Ron Hubbard, and it makes no sense and it has no meaning to your life. You have to pay money to learn that there's an intergalactic overlord. Now, at some point, Tom Cruise, as we all know, starts to date Nicole Kidman, the famous actress, and they do have a couple of kids together that they adopt. And the church worked really hard to break up Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise because Nicole was not a member of Scientology. The church also worked very hard to turn the two children against Nicole Kidman when they were finally successful in breaking up Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. Basically, the church was afraid that while he was with Nicole Kidman, he had strayed a little bit away from the church, and that was damaging to their bank account. So they had to do whatever they could to break these two up, and they were successful. At one point, Tom Cruise is awarded the Freedom Medal of Valor. And Miscavige produced a 30-minute video just like pumping up Tom Cruise's ego. And it worked. Like Tom Cruise is just like literally high on adrenaline from this freaking gassing up video that's like goes on 30 minutes too long. And basically what Miscavige was doing was they have to keep Tom Cruise happy. They have to pump up his ego. They have to give him bullshit Medal of Valor awards because they need to keep him in Scientology. They need to make him feel like he's the most important person in the world. And they do, and it works. And to this day, he's a Scientologist. And I would imagine he brings a lot of money and publicity to the church, which is exactly what they want from him. And the documentary exposes the fact that Tom Cruise gets a shit ton of free labor from the Sea Org members. So apparently they've gone to his, lavish homes. They've installed audio-visual in his home. They've built him a new limo. They tricked out his motorcycles, and everybody has to call him sir. And I imagine Cruise has to be aware of the fact that these people make pennies on the dollar and that he's just getting all these perks on the backs of these other people in the Sea Org who work night and day to please him. And he just takes it all in stride, like, yeah, I deserve this. I mean, I don't know what goes through his mind, but I think that he is fully aware. He's got to be fully aware that these people are being treated unfairly and not being paid even minimum wage to go to his house and trick out his motorcycles. At one point, the documentary talks about a young lady named Nazanin, or Naz for short, and she was apparently selected to be Tom Cruise's girlfriend, which is so gross. The church eventually pays to have her braces removed. They spend $20,000 on clothes at Burberry. They color her hair to Tom Cruise's liking. Yuck. And then they fly her first class to Tom Cruise's lavish home where she eventually starts living, and she becomes his girlfriend. The relationship ends up ending very badly. And apparently Naz told a friend about it. That friend goes and tells the Church of Scientology, and they turn around and punish Naz by making her scrub floors with a toothbrush. In 2007, this is when senior members of the Church of Scientology start speaking out against the church after they leave, and they expose physical beatings by David Miscavige. And people are deeply indoctrinated into the Church of Scientology, and they are extremely afraid to leave. For one reason, because, they've got these black PR packages on everybody who's done auditing sessions, which is basically every member of Scientology. And they threaten to expose any of this information if you leave the church. In Scientology, if someone is deemed a suppressive person, essentially their family are pressured to detach from them and to have nothing to do with them. So many families have been torn apart by this Church of Scientology because, maybe they have a brother or a sister or a husband or a wife, a partner who says, hey, I don't really like the Church of Scientology. Well, that's it. That person who doesn't like the church is deemed suppressive by the church, and the church starts telling the member, like, you need to detach from these people, that this person's not good for you. And as far as this machine that is the Church of Scientology, I have no idea how it's going to be stopped. It's gotten so big and so powerful. I think the only things that could take it down is if the tax exemption is removed by the IRS, which who knows if that'll ever happen. And if celebrities, big celebrities like Tom Cruise, John Travolta, and others start leaving the church, maybe then it will start, losing traction, and people will, and it won't be as rich and as powerful. But until something like that drastic happens, I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. And it's been reported that, David Miscavige, the, tiny devil man, who's the leader of the Church of Scientology, he refuses to do interviews because, of course, he doesn't want to answer questions about what goes on inside that church because it's completely corrupt, in my humble opinion. And as far as my final thoughts on this documentary and on Scientology as a whole, really, Scientology was established by an unwell, abusive, drug-abusing, money-hungry science fiction enthusiast as a means to get rich. That's all. And churches should not be in the business of treating mental illness without the expertise to do so. And they shouldn't be charging up the ass for people to take courses from an unwell science fiction writer that's going to do nothing to help your psyche. It's only going to hurt it. And pressuring people to disconnect from family members is a tactic that's long been used by many, many, many cults and cult leaders throughout history. And Scientology is no different. And absolutely no church should be worth billions of dollars, because that is direct evidence that you are hoarding wealth, that you are not putting that wealth to work out to do the public some good. You're hoarding wealth, and the leaders are getting richer and richer and richer by the day. And I would venture to say that if a church's leader, meaning L. Ron Hubbard, is a woman abusing, child abducting, drug abuser who goes on the run from the government and refuses to pay taxes, and who is a science fiction writer and nothing more, you maybe want to think twice about the authenticity and safety of the church that he established. And my final thought on this is basically Scientology sucks. And if you're a Scientologist, you're part of the problem. Fight me. All right, you guys, I want you to share your thoughts with me about Scientology. I'm sure you will have a lot to say on this topic like I did. You can share your thoughts with me on Instagram or in the comments on my YouTube channel at Jami on Air. That's Jami on Air. And I want to hear what you guys think about old Rotten Mouth McGee, L. Ron Hubbard. Like, why would anybody think it's a good idea to follow a church that he established, knowing all we know about this dude? He was not a good person. Like, he was a terrible, terrible trash garbage person. What are your thoughts on L. Ron Hubbard? And should he have gone to the dentist a few more times in his life? Oh, and whose teeth are worse, his or the Night Stalker? As always, this episode will be available on my podcast, Murderish, as well as on my YouTube channel at Jami on Air. And remember, you guys, cults are stupid, Ted Bundy's ugly, scammers suck at life, and binging true crime documentaries is self-care. Thanks for watching and listening. I'll see you next time.